Welcome back to the Deep Dive. I want to start today by asking you to do something a little different. I want you to just close your eyes for a second
Huh.
and visualize the Roman Empire.
Okay, I'm doing it. I'm picturing it. Marble columns, guys in togas, legions marching across Europe, the whole scene.
Right. And usually when we think about the fall of Rome, what comes to mind? We think of the barbarians at the gates, don't we?
Oh, absolutely. Fire, chaos, swords clashing, the physical destruction of the city.
That's it. We think of Visigoths, Vandals, the whole, sacking of the city. It's the big cinematic movie version of how an empire dies.
It is. It's the external threat, the enemy you can see.
Exactly. But what if I told you the fall didn't start with the barbarians? What if the rot started long, long before the first arrow was even fired?
Okay, you've got my attention.
What if I told you that the collapse of the greatest empire in history?
Yeah.
What if it started with the accountants?
The accountants. You're suggesting the Roman Empire fell because of, what, bad bookkeeping? That is a bold opening statement.
I am suggesting, based on the massive stack of sources we are diving into today, that Rome rotted from the inside out. We're talking about moral decay, political gridlock, and specifically fiscal irresponsibility.
And the terrifying premise of today's deep dive is a question that our source material asks directly.
It does. Is the United States looking in the mirror when it sees that history?
It's a heavy question. And to answer it, we are unpacking a source that, on the surface, is about maybe the most boring subject on Earth.
It really is. We are looking at a book and a documentary project. It's titled I.O.U.S.A. by Addison Wiggin and Katie Contrara.
And let's be honest, if you bring up federal debt and deficit accounting at a dinner party,
you are going to be eating dessert alone, no question.
Oh, absolutely. It sounds like the driest, most dust-covered, glaze-your-eyes-over topic imaginable. I mean, it's the kind of thing you'd put on to help you fall asleep.
But here is the twist, and frankly, it's the reason we're dedicating an entire hour to this today. The source material frames this not as a math problem. It frames it as a thriller.
A financial thriller. And a tragicomedy. That's the other term they use.
Right. A tragicomedy. It's a story about a broken business model in Washington, D.C., where the public perception of our economy, what we're told by the people in suits behind podiums, is completely, totally at odds with the cold, hard mathematical reality.
And that is really the mission of this entire project we're looking at. We're drawing from a book that was designed to take this, incredibly unsexy message and force it into the spotlight.
It's a sell.
It's the toughest. There's a name we're going to hear a lot today, Bob Bixby. He's the executive director of the Concord Coalition and a huge voice in our source material. He has this fantastic description of his job. He says discussing the deficit is like taking a cold shower.
I love that quote. It's so visceral, isn't it?
It's perfect. He says, we come along after the sexy messages and cool people off. So you've got politicians offering this warm bath of tax cuts and new programs. And Bixby is the guy standing there with a bucket of ice water saying, wake up, the house is on fire.
And to stick with the terrifying metaphors, we have the central analogy provided by the man who is arguably the protagonist of this whole story, David Walker.
Right. At the time of this source material, he was the Comptroller General of the United States.
Let's pause on that title for a second, because Comptroller General sounds like a mid-level bureaucrat in some Kafka novel.
It really does.
But it's actually one of the most powerful positions in the government. He's the nation's chief accountant. He runs the GAO, the Government Accountability Office.
Basically, he's the auditor-in-chief for the entire country.
Exactly. His job is to audit the United States of America. He checks the receipts. And because he has a 15-year term, he's insulated from political pressure. He can't just be fired because the president doesn't like the math.
And David Walker, looking at the books, he compares the United States directly, explicitly, to Rome before the fall.
He isn't saying that lightly, Ivy. I mean, that's not just a throwaway line.
No, not at all. He's looking at the numbers, the unfunded promises, the complete refusal to deal with reality, and he sees a mirror image of an empire in decline. He sees a civilization that has decided to party on credit while its very foundation crumbles.
So today we're going to unpack that. We're going to look at what Walker calls the 4 deficits threatening the nation. And a spoiler alert for you, it's not just about money.
No, it's a multi-front war.
We're going to explore the Fiscal Wake-Up Tour, which I have to say sounds like the least fun rock concert ever.
The world's nerdiest road trip.
But it's actually a fascinating bipartisan effort to sound the alarm. We'll also look at some truly terrifying projections for the future dates that are creeping closer and closer if this fiscal cancer, as Walker calls it, is left untreated.
And finally, we are going to define the leadership deficit, which the sources argue is actually the most dangerous deficit of them all.
And I think it is important to state right up front, and the source makes this crystal clear.
Yeah.
This isn't about partisanship. This isn't the left versus right thing.
No, it's a mathematical issue, not an ideological one. The numbers, they just don't care if you're a Democrat or a Republican.
Absolutely. Math is incredibly stubborn that way. So let's jump into section 1, the real state of the union versus political theater. The book opens with a scene that I think just perfectly encapsulates the disconnect we're talking about.
It's perfect. The setting is January 2008, the State of the Union address.
Right. So set the scene for us. President George W. Bush is giving his final State of the Union. The chamber's packed. You have the Supreme Court justices in their robes, the Joint Chiefs with all their medals.
The cabinet, the senators, the House members, it's the Super Bowl of American politics.
And the atmosphere is just electric. The source notes that he was interrupted 72 times by applause.
72 times. Just think about that. That's basically a standing ovation every few minutes. It creates this feedback loop of success. Everything is great. Look how much we're all clapping.
It's pure theater. But here's the kicker, the detail that really matters. In that entire speech, amidst all that applause, amidst all the talk of freedom and prosperity, how many times did he mention the word debt?
Once.
Just once.
And even then, it wasn't a warning. It was just to reassert this projection that the deficit would be 0 by 2012.
A projection that was already known to be what?
Completely off base. Wildly inaccurate by the time he said it. It was a fantasy number, and everyone in that room who was paying attention knew it.
It really brings up this idea of the State of the Union as a performance rather than a report. I mean, imagine if the CEO of a publicly traded company stood up at a shareholder meeting, completely ignored the fact that the company was bleeding cash, and just talked about how great the cafeteria food was.
They'd be sued for fraud, and they'd be fired by the board before they even left a stage.
Of course.
But in Washington, it's tradition. And the source walks us through this history. It's not just Bush. This is a deeply bipartisan problem.
Right. The book goes back through the archives on this.
You've got Eisenhower, way back in the 50s, warning about the calamitous cycle of debt. Then you have Lyndon Johnson in the 60s promising balanced budgets while at the same time launching the Great Society and the Vietnam War.
Gums and butter. Trying to have it all.
Exactly. Then you have Reagan in the 80s saying things like, we must act today to preserve tomorrow, while he's simultaneously overseeing a debt explosion where it went from under $1 trillion to $2.6 trillion.
It feels like a script that just gets rewritten slightly every 4 to 8 years, but the ending is always the same.
The debt goes up.
The debt goes up.
Precisely. And the source highlights a key statistic here to show the dissonance. In January 2008, the very month of that State of the Union address where debt was mentioned only once, the national debt crossed the $9 trillion threshold.
$9 trillion. And just to remind you, that was almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The number is vastly, vastly higher now. But even then, it was an astronomical sum.
And the political rhetoric at the time, the magic solution, was that we could grow our way out of it. That's the classic line.
If the economy just gets bigger, the debt will matter less. We hear that all the time.
All the time. But was the economy actually getting bigger at that moment?
No. That's the tragic irony of it all. At that specific moment, the economy was actually teetering toward a massive recession. We were right on the brink of the 2008 financial crisis.
So you have this complete split-screen reality. You have the politicians in the Capitol building basking in applause, and then you have the actual balance sheet of the nation bleeding red ink.
Which brings us back to David Walker, the man standing in the middle of the tracks, waving the red flag. He went on 60 Minutes, which we'll talk more about later, and he used a phrase that really stuck. He called the situation a fiscal cancer.
A fiscal cancer. That choice of words is very, very deliberate.
Why cancer? Why not just call it a problem or a challenge? Those are the words politicians usually use.
Because of how cancer works. It's insidious. In the early stages, cancer is often asymptomatic. You feel fine, you look fine, you might even feel great. But inside, on a cellular level, something is fundamentally wrong. It's multiplying.
So he's saying the economy looks healthy on the outside. People are buying houses. The stock market is up. But structurally, it's dying.
That's exactly his point. He said, quote, "It is growing within us, and if we do not treat it, it could have catastrophic consequences. By the time you feel the pain of cancer, by the time the symptoms are undeniable, it's often too late for simple medicine."
Right. Then you need radical surgery, you need radiation, it's painful, and it's dangerous.
And Walker is arguing we're in those early stages and we are willfully ignoring the diagnosis.
So to understand the anatomy of this cancer, Walker introduces a framework. He says we make a mistake when we just focus on the debt or the deficit as this one big, scary blob. He breaks it down into the 4 deficits.
And this is really the core curriculum of the deep dive today. If you want to understand the illness, you have to understand the individual symptoms.
Okay, let's unpack them. What's deficit number 1?
Deficit number 1 is the budget deficit. This is the one most people hear about on the news. It's the most straightforward.
Simple enough. Spending more than you earn in a given year.
It's the annual shortfall. If the government takes in, say, $2 trillion in taxes but spends $2.5 trillion, you have a $500 billion budget deficit for that year, period.
Okay. What is deficit number 2?
Deficit number 2 is the savings deficit. And this one is about the American people and the government not saving enough money. We have become a nation of spenders.
We do love our credit card.
We do. In many other major economies, personal savings rates are high. There's a cushion. In the U.S., the savings rate has, at times, plummeted to near zero or even negative. We're financing our lifestyle today by borrowing from our future selves.
So if the economy hits a bump, there are no airbags.
There are no airbags. Okay, so that's number 2. Deficit number 3 is the balance of payments deficit, which is often just called the trade deficit. This is about our financial relationship with the rest of the world.
This is the we buy more from China than they buy from us issue, right?
Roughly, yes. It's a bit more complicated, but that's the gist. We import massive amounts of goods, electronics, cars, clothes, cheap plastic toys, and to pay for them, we send dollars out of the country.
But we aren't exporting enough to bring all those dollars back. So how do we get those dollars back to keep our own economy running?
We borrow them. The very countries we send our dollars to, like China and Japan, then lend those same dollars back to us by buying our government debt.
So China sells us TVs, we give them dollars, and then they use those dollars to buy U.S. Treasury bonds.
Exactly. Which means we are fundamentally dependent on foreign lenders to finance our own government. It puts us in a strategically vulnerable position. If your bank manager suddenly decides to stop lending to you, you have a big, big problem.
Okay, and finally, the 4th deficit. The one Walker argues is the most dangerous of all.
The leadership deficit.
The leadership deficit. This one isn't a math problem.
No, this is a character problem. It's the failure of politicians across the board from both parties to make the tough choices that are necessary to fix the first 3 deficits. It's the unwillingness to be the one to deliver that cold shower.
It's a deficit of courage, really.
A deficit of courage and honesty. It is consistently choosing the easy lie over the hard truth.
We're going to come back to that leadership deficit in a big way later on. But first, I want to clarify something that I think confuses a lot of people, myself included sometimes. You mentioned the budget deficit as number 1, but we also talk about the debt. In Section 2, the source material really tries to hammer home the difference.
It is a crucial distinction, and honestly, politicians often conflate them on purpose to confuse voters. It's a common tactic.
So break it down for us. Let's make it simple.
Okay. Think of the deficit as your performance for 1 year. Let's say you earn $50,000 a year, but you spend $60,000. You have a $10,000 deficit for that year.
Okay. That's my shortfall for 2024. I get that.
Right. The debt is the accumulated total of all those yearly deficits. So if you run that $10,000 deficit for 10 years in a row, you now have a $100,000 debt.
So the deficit is the hose pouring water into the bathtub, and the debt is the total amount of water that's rising in the tub.
That is a perfect visualization, and here's why it matters so much. Politicians will often get on TV and say, we cut the deficit in half, and people think, oh, great, we're solving the problem, the debt is going down.
But it's not.
No. All it means is that the water is flowing into the tub slightly slower than it was last year. The water level, the debt is still rising. Unless the deficit is zero or you actually have a surplus, the debt always goes up.
And to fix that annual shortfall, that deficit, the source brings in Bob Bixby again with a dieting metaphor, which I think we can all relate to.
Yes. Bixby says there are really only 2 ways to fix a budget, just like there are only 2 ways to lose weight. You can eat less.
Which means cutting spending.
Or you can exercise more.
Which means raising revenue or taxes.
Exactly. And just like with dieting, people absolutely hate both options.
Of course. Nobody wants to eat less. Nobody wants to give up the cake. And nobody wants to wake up at 5 a.m. to go run on the treadmill. We want a magic pill.
We all want the magic.
In the weight loss world, that's lose 30 pounds in 30 days while eating pizza. What's the magic pill in Washington?
It's usually called future growth or cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. You hear it in every single campaign.
Oh, every time. We'll go through the budget line by line with a fine-tooth comb.
Right, or these tax cuts will pay for themselves because the economy will boom so much. It's a comforting fantasy that's used to avoid making the hard choices.
Bixby also uses this great kitchen table metaphor. He asks you to imagine a family meeting.
This is a scene we can all picture, right? Mom and dad sit down at the kitchen table with the checkbook and all the bills spread out.
Okay, kids, money is tight this month.
Right. In a normal, responsible family, if you're spending way more than you earn, the parents have to be the bad guys. They have to say, sorry, we have to cancel the fancy cable package. No Disney World this year. We're eating leftovers for a while.
We'll have to make sacrifices.
Yeah.
But in the U.S. government version of this family meeting, the family is running these massive deficits, hundreds of billions of dollars a year. But instead of saying, we need to cut back, what do the parents, the politicians do?
They turn to the kids and they say, good news, we're going to Disney World and we're getting a new car and I'm buying you all ponies.
And the kids go, but Dad, how are we paying for any of this?
Don't you worry about it, champ. We have a magic credit card.
And the kids, the voters, they cheer. Best dad ever.
And that best dad gets reelected. This source quotes a classic Washington joke here. A politician who collects $10 in taxes and returns $10 in services gets polite applause. But the politician who collects $10 and returns $11, he gets elected. Every time. Because everyone loves getting that extra dollar of value. But that extra dollar has to come from somewhere. It comes from the debt.
There is a really chilling quote from Pete Peterson in the book. He was a former Commerce Secretary, a billionaire, and a huge figure in fiscal responsibility advocacy. He says the government is slipping a huge hidden check to the next generation.
He calls it a free lunch that we're consuming today, but the bill is being mailed to our children and our grandchildren. At the time the source was written, Peterson noted that we were borrowing about 22 cents for every single dollar the federal government spent.
Let's just pause on that math for a second. For every dollar the government spends on soldiers, on roads, on schools, on everything, 22 cents of it essentially doesn't exist.
It is borrowed. Imagine running your household like that. You go to the grocery store, you buy $100 worth of food, you pay $78 from your checking account, and you put $22 on a high-interest credit card.
Yeah.
And here's the kicker. You don't actually plan to pay that credit card off. You plan to just hand it to your toddler when they turn 18 and say, good luck, kid. Hope you have a good job.
That is devastating.
Yeah.
When you put it like that, it's theft.
It's intergenerational theft. And it leads us to the other massive factor looming over this entire conversation. The silver tsunami.
The demographics. This is the accelerant on the fire, isn't it?
It is pure, simple math. The baby boomers are retiring. We have known this was coming for decades. It is not a surprise. People don't suddenly turn 65 overnight without any warning. We've had the birth certificate since the 1940s.
We saw them coming.
We saw them coming. But the system is under incredible stress because of this aging population, combined with constantly rising healthcare costs. For a long, long time, the Social Security program was running a surplus.
Meaning it was taking in more cash from workers' paychecks than it was paying out to current retirees.
Right. Because all the boomers were working. They were in their peak earning years. You had lots and lots of workers paying for a smaller number of retirees. It was a cash cow for the government.
And what happened to that surplus cash? Did we save it? Did we put it in that famous lockbox? The infamous lockbox. No. Of course not. The government borrowed it. They used that Social Security surplus to paper over the deficits in the rest of the budget. They spent it on other stuff, defense, education, tax cuts, and just left a bunch of I.O.U.S. in the Social Security Trust Fund.
So it was an accounting trick. It made the deficit look smaller than it actually was. Look, we aren't borrowing that much from China.
Yeah, because you're borrowing it from grandma.
Exactly.
But the source warns, and this is critical, that this surplus is ending. As more and more boomers retire, that cash cow turns into a cash drain. Instead of lending money to the rest of the government, Social Security needs to get paid back.
So the cushion is gone, just as the costs are about to skyrocket.
Precisely. The tide is going out, and we are about to find out that we aren't wearing any swimming trunks. Let's shift gears a bit to Section 3, the mission. Because this deep dive isn't just about the grim numbers. It's about the people who are trying to tell this story. The source material, I.O.U.S.A, it actually started as a different project, didn't it?
It did. It had a really interesting origin story. Addison Wiggin, one of the authors, had written a previous book called Empire of Debt. It was a dense academic history of debt in America. And he and his co-author, they decided to engage in a bit of a stunt. They decided they were going to mail a copy of this book to every single member of Congress.
A little light reading for the senators. I'm sure they read every single bit.
Yeah, I'm sure it went straight from the mailroom to the intern's recycling bin.
Yeah.
But here's the serendipity, the movie moment. On the exact same day, they were stuffing these books into envelopes to mail to Washington. This was November 14th, 2005. David Walker gave a press conference at the National Press Club.
The famous Rome is burning speech.
That's the one. Walker stood up and said the U.S. has a broken business model. Wiggin saw this coverage in USA Today and had this light bulb moment. He realized, wait a minute, the Comptroller General of the United States, the ultimate insider, the guy with the badge, is saying the exact same thing we're writing in our book.
That must have been an incredibly validating moment.
It was. And it sparked the realization that a book just wasn't enough. Empire Debt was a heavy read. To reach the average American, they needed something more visceral, they needed a film, they needed to try to make the economy entertaining.
Which seems like a tall order. Hey, honey, let's skip the blockbuster and watch the documentary about the Federal Ledger.
It's the hardest sell in Hollywood. It's about accounting. It's a thriller. But that's where the Fiscal wake-up tour comes in. This is one of the most interesting parts of the narrative. Walker and Bixby teamed up with a coalition of groups that, usually hate each other.
The Avengers of Accounting.
A very, very nerdy Avengers, yes. Look at the lineup of who was on this tour bus. You had the Concord Coalition, which is nonpartisan. You had the Brookings Institution, which is generally considered a left-leaning, very liberal think tank.
Okay.
And then you had the Heritage Foundation, which is a stalwart of the conservative right. And then David Walker, the independent accountant, sort of as the referee.
So you have the left and the right, literally on the same bus.
Literally on a bus, traveling the country together, eating diner food, staying in motels.
That sounds like a sitcom waiting to happen.
It really does, and the source emphasizes how significant this coalition was. These groups, they disagree vehemently on the solutions. Heritage wants massive spending cuts and privatization. Brookings might want to protect social programs and raise taxes on the wealthy.
Right, they're polar opposites on policy.
But they were in complete agreement on the problem. The numbers do not add up. The current path is unsustainable.
It's like a doctor's consultation, where 3 different doctors with 3 different treatment philosophies all agree on the diagnosis.
Exactly. They might argue over whether you need surgery or chemotherapy or some experimental treatment, but they all agree on one thing. You have cancer. And they took this message to town halls all across America.
And what was the reaction? Because the conventional wisdom in Washington, and I hear this from political consultants all the time, is that people don't care about this stuff. They say, it's too complicated, people only care about gas prices and what's for dinner.
That is the myth. But the source says the man on the street interviews they did revealed something totally different. People do care. They're frustrated. They feel like they aren't getting straight answers. They know instinctively that you can have it all is a lie.
They know there's no such thing as a free lunch. It's common sense.
It is. And there's this really touching anecdote in the book about David Walker and his granddaughter.
Yes, this one really brings it all home.
Walker recounts that he was reading to his 4-year-old granddaughter one night, and for some reason, maybe he's just that kind of grandfather, never off the clock, he read her a paragraph from a report about mortgaging the future.
A bedtime story about debt service payments. Once upon a time, there was a yield curve.
Exactly. But her response wasn't boredom. She looked up at him with these big eyes and she just said, "Devastating, Granddaddy."
Devastating. From a 4-year-old.
It sounds almost too perfect to be true, but it speaks to the moral clarity of the issue. Even a child understands that it's just wrong to spend someone else's money without their permission, especially if that someone else hasn't even been born yet. It triggers a basic sense of fairness.
But the filmmakers, they still struggled to get media attention for this, right? It's just inherently unsexy. But then came this 60-minute segment.
That was the turning point. 60 Minutes is the gold standard of serious journalism in America. When Steve Kroft interviewed David Walker, it brought the Fiscal wake-up tour into millions of living rooms. It legitimized the issue overnight.
It took it from a niche policy discussion to a mainstream national concern.
And it framed it perfectly. The nation's top accountant was essentially blowing the whistle on his own employer, the United States federal government. It made Walker a minor celebrity. People started recognizing him in airports. Hey, you're the debt guy, keep fighting. It showed there really was an appetite for the truth.
So let's provide some of that truth with more context. Section 4 covers a brief history of debt, because to understand where we're going, we really have to look at where we've been. The source provides a timeline, starting way back in 1776.
It does, and the pattern for most of American history is very, very clear. We borrow for wars and major crises, and then in times of peace, we pay it back. It's a cycle of responsibility.
So take us through the highlight reel. What was the situation in 1789?
You have the Revolutionary War debt. It was huge relative to the size of the tiny new economy, about 30% of GDP. But the founding fathers, Hamilton, Jefferson, Washington, they were terrified of debt. They viewed it as a direct threat to liberty and sovereignty.
They saw debt as a form of slavery to foreign powers.
Precisely. So they worked aggressively to pay it down. And then we have this one magical year in American history, 1835.
The golden year.
1835 is the one and only time in U.S. history that the national debt was zero. Not low, not manageable, zero. A clean slate.
Incredible. We haven't seen that since. Who was president?
Andrew Jackson. He absolutely hated debt. He viewed it as a moral failing. He sold off federal lands. He vetoed spending bills. And he paid off the debt entirely. He actually threw a party to celebrate.
And then what happened?
Then came the Civil War. Massive borrowing. The debt skyrocketed. But again, after the war, we spent decades paying it down. Then World War I, another huge spike in debt, followed by another paydown in the 1920s.
So the system worked.
Yeah.
An emergency happens, you borrow money. The emergency ends, you pay the money back. It's like using a credit card for a medical emergency and then working hard to pay it off.
Correct. Even the Great Depression and World War II, which saw the most massive borrowing in history, fit the pattern. It was justified. We were fighting for survival and saving the world from fascism. The debt-to-GDP ratio hit over 100%.
And people bought war bonds. It was seen as a patriotic duty to lend money to the government.
Exactly. But again, after the war, we entered a long period of growth and paid down the debt relative to the size of the economy. But then the source identifies a fundamental earth-shattering shift in the 1980s. This is where the old pattern breaks. This is where the broken business model really begins.
Shift. What changed?
In the 1980s, under President Reagan, the debt exploded during a time of peace and prosperity. This wasn't a world war. This wasn't a depression. This was a structural change in how we view governance.
The source mentions supply-side economics and the Laffer curve here. Can you explain that without putting us to sleep?
I will do my best. The Laffer curve is a theory that says if you cut tax rates, you will stimulate the economy so much that the government actually ends up with more tax revenue because there's so much more activity to tax.
So you get lower tax rates, but you end up with a bigger pie.
That was the theory. We can cut taxes and still balance the budget. It sounded great. But the source argues that the result was simply an addiction to debt. We cut the taxes, but we didn't cut the spending. In fact, defense spending went way up, so the gap just widened.
And it became structural. It wasn't an emergency measure anymore. It was just how we did business. It became a lifestyle choice.
There's a brief glimmer of hope in the Clinton era. We actually ran a budget surplus for the first time in 30 years.
I remember that. The dot-com boom was in full swing.
Yes. A booming economy and some modest tax hikes led to a surplus. We were actually paying down the debt. But it was incredibly short-lived. Under George W. Bush, we went right back to deficits, but on a massive scale.
What caused that?
You had the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which were put on the credit card. The first time we fought major wars without raising taxes to pay for them. You had major tax cuts. You had the new prescription drug benefit. The surplus vanished, and the red ink returned with a vengeance.
So that brings us to the future, or rather the future as it was viewed from the source material back in 2008. This is Section 5, the projections. And folks, this is the part where you might want to sit down. This is the horror movie part of the script.
These are the dates that should keep us up at night. The source cites a study by the NCEBP, the National Center for Policy Analysis. They lay out what they call a doomsday scenario.
Let's walk through the timeline they projected. Start with 2012. What did they say would happen by then?
By 2012, they projected the government would have to stop doing 1 in 10 things it currently does just to pay the bills, assuming we wanted to balance the budget without raising taxes.
Okay, a 10% cut. That hurts. Maybe the lines at the DMV get longer, but maybe we can survive it. What about 2020?
By 2020, the projection was that the government would have to stop doing one in four things. Imagine cutting 25% of all federal services, shut down the national parks, cut FBI funding by a quarter, stop road maintenance in a quarter of the country.
That is drastic. That fundamentally affects daily life for everyone. What about 2030?
By 2030, the government stops performing half of its services. 50% of the government just gone.
Yeah, pick government.
And looking further out, 2040, 2050, this is where the four deficits and the demographics we talked about really collide. By 2040 or 2050, Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are projected to consume nearly the entire federal budget.
Wait, I need you to clarify that.
Yeah.
You mean all the tax revenue collected, every dollar from your paycheck, every corporate tax dollar, all of it would go just to pay for those three programs?
That is correct. Which leaves $0 for national defense, 0 for education, 0 for infrastructure, 0 for the justice system, 0 for scientific research, 0 for border security, nothing.
The government cannot function like that. That's the definition of a failed state.
That is Walker's entire point. It is a broken business model. And there's an even more extreme date in the source, 2082, where they project Medicare alone would consume the entire federal budget.
Just healthcare. Nothing else. The United States becomes just an insurance company with, well, actually, without an army, because we couldn't afford one.
It illustrates the mathematical absurdity of the trajectory we're on. We are on a path that leads directly to a cliff. And there's this concept of negative compounding that makes it all worse.
Compounding interest. Einstein called it the eighth wonder of the world.
It is a wonder when you're saving money. It makes your wealth grow exponentially. But when you're a debtor, it works against you. It's the snowball effect. The source pinpoints the year 2017 as a critical turning point.
Why 2017 specifically?
That was the projected year when Social Security would stop running surpluses and start running permanent deficits. Once that happens, the debt begins to spiral much faster. We have to borrow to pay the benefits, and then we have to pay interest on that borrowing, which means we have to borrow even more.
It just feeds on itself. The interest payments start to eat the budget alive.
The source breaks this down to a daily cost, which is just staggering. At the time of publication in 2008, the government was racking up $1.86 billion in new debt every single day.
Every day. Saturday, Sunday, holidays, $1.86 billion.
And it meant that every citizen owed a share of $32,000. And remember, that was in 2008. That number has grown significantly since then.
It really paints a picture of a runaway train. But the question remains, why? Why don't we stop it? If the math is so clear, if the cliff is visible, why don't we pull the emergency brake? And that leads us to Section 6, the leadership deficit.
This is the fourth deficit, and as Walker says, it's the most dangerous one, because here's the dirty little secret. We technically know how to fix the budget deficit.
The math isn't some great mystery.
No, it's just arithmetic. We know we need to cut spending or raise taxes, or more likely do some combination of both. The Congressional Budget Office releases reports every single year with hundreds of options. Here is how much you save if you raise the retirement age. Here's how much revenue you get if you raise the gas tax. The solutions are all on the shelf.
So it's not a capability problem, it's a will problem.
Exactly. It is a complete failure of political will. Politicians are afraid to tell voters the truth. They're terrified of that cold shower. They know that if they campaign on a platform of higher taxes and lower benefits, they will lose to the person promising lower taxes and higher benefits.
It's the free lunch problem again. As voters, we tend to vote for the candy, not the vegetables.
And it raises this profound moral issue. The source quotes Bill Bonner, the co-author of Empire of Debt. He says, it's not just immoral, it's fundamentally wrong and mean for one generation to spend the next generation's money.
Mean. That is such a simple but powerful word. We are partying on our children's dime.
We're sticking them with the tab for a dinner they didn't even get to eat. It's like we're living in a mansion and handing them the mortgage, but we've already stripped the copper wiring out of the walls before we left.
This frustration with the leadership deficit actually led David Walker to make a massive career change, didn't it?
It did, and this is a key plot point in the book and the documentary. Walker realized he could only do so much from the inside as Comptroller General. He was constrained by his office. He could audit, but he couldn't advocate. He couldn't go out and campaign for specific solutions.
So he resigned. He quit the top accounting job in the entire country.
To go lead the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, Pete Peterson, the billionaire businessman we mentioned earlier, recruited him. Walker's new goal was to do what he couldn't do as a government official, advocate for specific policy solutions, and crucially, build a grassroots movement.
He wanted to go directly to the people.
He wanted to bypass the politicians entirely. The foundation actually bought the rights to the I.O.U.S.A. film and distributed it widely. They wanted to educate voters before the 2008 election, hoping that an informed citizenry would finally demand better from their leaders.
So what does this all mean? As we wrap up this deep dive, let's try to summarize the key takeaways from I.O.U.S.A. because there's a lot here to process.
Okay. First, I think we have to understand that the U.S. suffers from 4 deficits, not just one. The budget, the savings, the trade, and the leadership deficit. They are all interconnected. You can't fix one without addressing the others.
Second, the fiscal cancer is mathematical. It is not an ideological theory. The numbers are the numbers, and they are grim. You can't spin your way out of compound interest.
Third, demographics are destiny. The retirement of the baby boomers is the event that tips the scales. It acts as an accelerant to the entire problem, removing the cushion of the Social Security surplus and driving costs through the roof.
And fourth, and maybe this is the hopeful part, the public is ready for the truth. Or at least they are more ready than the politicians give them credit for. They can handle the cold shower if it's explained to them honestly.
That is the hopeful part of the message, the belief that if you treat voters like adults, they will respond like adults.
But I want to leave our listeners with a provocative thought that really lingers in the subtext of this entire source material. The book seems to suggest that democracy itself might be part of the problem. Voters naturally vote for the free lunch. We are biologically wired for short-term gain over long-term pain.
It's the ultimate test of a republic, isn't it? Can a democracy actually solve a long-term problem that requires short-term sacrifice? Or are we destined to follow the path of Rome? Rome didn't fall because it was conquered from the outside. It fell because it rotted from the inside.
And if the leadership deficit is the primary problem, as the expert here, how do you see the solution?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the source material implies that the solution isn't really in Washington, it's in the mirror. If politicians are only selling candy, because that's what we keep buying, then we, the voters, have to start demanding vegetables.
We have to be the ones to say, no, don't cut my taxes if you aren't also cutting spending. Or, no, don't increase that benefit if you can't explain how you'll pay for it.
We have to change the political incentives. Until a politician gets a standing ovation for promising a balanced budget through shared sacrifice, nothing is going to fundamentally change.
That is a very sobering thought. We like to blame them, the politicians, but maybe the problem really is us.
It usually is.
We hope this deep dive has given you a new perspective on those unsexy numbers you see scrolling across the bottom of the news screen. They might just be the most critical story of our generation. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.